Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training, and I'm going to do a short video on what's new in EDIUS 9.3 that was released in September of 2018. There's a reasonable list of new features in this particular release. Of the new things that have been added, I particularly like the new options on the optical flow slow motion, coloured markers, and the ability to see clips properly in 50p projects, but there's a couple of other nice new things as well, so I'll go through all of them here. So first, let's take a look at the new slow motion options that we've got in EDIUS 9.3. When you want to slow a clip down, obviously you just right click, go to time effects speed, you type in the percentage, and the other important thing you've got to decide is under field option here, and that's how is the slow motion calculated. Optical flow is the fancy way that was added in EDIUS 8.3. Nearest neighbour just repeats things. Frame blending kind of crossfades frames together. And optical flow makes stuff up, so this is the better option, which generally results in better slow motion. Up to now there's only been one setting, but now in EDIUS 9.3 you can actually customize how the slow motion is worked out. So the standard way of doing it is high speed, and if you click on the little drop down here, you can see I've got lots of different quality options and a custom option. Choose the custom option, then you have a little slider which moves you between the low and the high, and a little tick box which decides whether you're using the old algorithm for optical flow or the new one. And obviously choosing some of these presets just sets some of those things for you. So it works in the same way, you've just got options as to how you calculate it. Do these different quality options have a significant effect? And the answer is yes. Here we have a clip taken from my local Bluebell Railway, which is one I used when I was showing off optical flow in the first place. And if I just start playing it back, this is a clip that slowed down to 25% speed, and the first version here has got optical flow as it was done originally when it was added to EDIUS 8, and the second one has got optical flow with a new high quality setting. Now hopefully you can see the difference here, but it is actually quite marked when you're looking at it full screen on a computer. Now to make it a bit more obvious, what I'm going to do is literally put the two things next to each other. So here, have a close look around the man as he walks in front of the train. And you can see here, on the left hand side, there's an awful lot of shimmering going on around the edges of him as he goes past. Whereas on this side, there's a lot less shimmering. I mean, it's not 100% perfect, not as good as it would have been if I'd filmed it on a 200 frame slow motion camera or something, but it is a lot better. It's like, in this side here, he's got a kind of force field going around him. In this one, it hasn't. I mean, this kind of artifacting, this kind of stuff that's going on around the edge, that's the sort of thing that happens using optical flow. It happens with all the different editing programs that have got optical flow with them, because the computer is making stuff up, and sometimes it doesn't get it right. It does cause funny edges and occasionally funny things going on. Basically, they're called artifacts. That's exactly what it does. Another good example is this one. So here we have just a shot of this guy walking in, again 25%, and you notice some really funny things are going on here near these vertical lines and around the computer screen as he walks in. Most of it's okay, that didn't work. Now we have a version using the new high quality setting, and you notice there is a bit there, but there's not nearly as much as there was on the regular optical flow slow motion. Those clips were 50p clips. Now I'm using a 25p HD timeline here, so obviously they've got more frames in the first place. You get worse quality slow motion when you're using 25p clips. So for example here, I've got a clip that's a 4K clip on an HD timeline, and it was filmed at 25p, and again slowed it down to 25%. First version of this is using the regular optical flow slow motion, and the second one is using the new high quality. So you can see some very odd things going on around his head there, for example. Something peculiar happens on his arm. And here we have the same thing with the high quality, and you get a little bit of it, but you get a lot less. The whole thing is a lot smoother. The other question, of course, is, okay, well, I've got all these different settings. What's the best one to go for? So let me just right click on a slow motion clip, go to time effect and field option just to get to these optical flow settings. Should you go for high speed, medium quality, blah, blah? In fact, why not put it on highest quality all the time? The simple answer is it takes longer to process. The idea of the original optical flow they introduced in EDIUS 8 is that on a decent machine you'd be able to play it back in real time, which you can do. You go to some of these other options and you'll have to render it for sure. course, it does also depend on how good your computer is. Now, in my own tests, I actually found high quality was actually pretty good. Highest quality was a little bit better, but I don't know, for most of my stuff, I thought high quality was probably good enough and definitely better than high speed. I did try fiddling around a bit with the custom and try fiddling with these sliders, but generally I thought advanced matching was best. I know, for example, just looking at these two clips here, in this little piece of the video, I'm comparing high quality here to highest quality here. And I particularly notice, again, if you look at his head, some peculiar things do happen on that as it goes from the light to the shade. And between the two, can't honestly say I can see any difference. They both look pretty much the same to me. But the whole point of having a whole bunch of settings that you can try out is that you can try them out and see what happens. As I say, it does impact the rendering time. For example, this little clip that I've got here, which is, 19 seconds long, so it's a reasonable amount of video. 19 seconds long, 4K footage on an HD timeline using a Coffee Lake i7. If I set it to high quality, it took about 2 minutes to render. If I set it to highest quality, it took about 8 or 9 minutes to render. So it does actually impact on the time. But obviously you can try it out. Drop a comment below as to what your own feeling is after you've had a go with it. But again, it's a nice option. Better quality is always a good thing in my opinion. The next thing I want to look at is the coloured markers that we've got inside of EDIUS. So obviously we know to do markers for ages. You just hit the marker button or you press the V key and it adds in a marker. What we've now got is the ability to change these into coloured markers. So they're all orange at the moment. You can just go up to one, click on the colour and then choose to make it a different colour. So there are. We've now got a red marker. Let's change that one to a yellow marker. The colours have no specific meaning. Obviously, you can just choose yourself whatever they mean. It's just a different way of highlighting bits of the timeline. If you want to be able to put in a specific coloured marker straight away, as opposed to having to put the marker in and then change the colour afterwards, you can either add a button up here to do it, or you can add a keyboard shortcut to it. You do that in the normal way by going up to Settings and User Settings. For buttons, you go to the button heading. And here I'm going to go to the marker window and you can see I've got options here to put in red markers and blue markers and pink markers and yellow markers. So now I want to put in another colour marker, bosh. Put in a blue marker, bosh. Simple. Keyboard shortcuts, again very simple, just go back to the user settings, keyboard shortcuts, put in the word marker, which will help you find the marker ones, and here you can see you've got keyboard shortcuts putting in the different coloured markers, blue ones, pink ones or purple ones. Obviously you can have a marker which just goes at a specific point, or a marker that's set between an in and an out point. I mean, that's nothing new. We've always been able to do either markers in one place or to mark out a region by putting one with an in and out. So you can choose to assign keyboard shortcuts to any of these. Logically, it would be something to do with the V key, I guess, so possibly Alt and V for that one, or whatever. You can go through and assign different keyboard shortcuts, and again, they'll put markers on for you. Now, because we've got coloured markers, we have to have different ways of treating them if you're exporting or importing them, and also if you're making DVDs. So, for example, you can export all your markers to go off to somewhere else. Now, if I click on the Export button, we've got a new export option here, which is to export it as an XML file. It used to do CSV files, which is comma-separated values. Basically, this is a text file with commas between the values, typical kind of spreadsheet. Now it's doing XMLs as well, and XMLs is a pretty standard way of transferring information between different editing programs. Major difference between using these two is if you'd use the old-fashioned CSV versions, it loses the colours. If you use the XML version, then it can keep the colours. So let me just save this somewhere, start up a new timeline, import markers, in they come with all the colours. But if I go back to my other timeline, export it as a CSV file instead, again make up another sequence, import the markers and choose the CSV version, it brings the markers in but they're all orange. If you do export the old-fashioned way, it does export all the markers, but when you bring them back into EDIUS they all come in as orange, whereas if you use the XML way of doing it, it'll remember the colours. I mean, it's nice they kept the old way. There are times when I want CSVs and it's nice to be able to have XMLs as well, so I could import it into some other program. Other interesting thing is what happens when you make a DVD. Let me go back to this timeline where I bunged on a few different markers. You notice I've got an orange one, yellow one, a couple of reds and a blue. Let's go and make a DVD. So burn to disk. So the usual stuff with Blu-ray or DVD, which movies are in it, what the style of the menu is. And then I'm going to get to the edit tab and look at the chapter menu, because all those markers will become chapters. And looking at the chapter menu, you can see, right, I have got 5 markers, but I've only got 2 chapters. Why is that? It's because when it comes to DVDs, only the orange markers become chapters on a DVD. All the rest are ignored. And you might say, I've only got 1 orange marker, why have I got 2 chapters? Well, there's always a chapter at the start of the video. My first orange marker is 9 seconds in, so it automatically whacks one in at the start. And then the second one, the orange marker, is chapter 2, and that's it. Again, that's a nice thing, because previously you put any markers on the timeline and they could just be little notes to yourself about something you've got to fix later on or something you've got to get back from somebody else. I'm using these as notes as I'm editing, and all of those markers will become chapters. Well, maybe I just want to use them as notes. Well, now you can. As long as you don't use an orange one, you can actually make as many notes as you want on the timeline and they won't become chapters on the DVD. Only the orange ones will become chapters on the DVD, which again is a nice little change. Next thing worth mentioning is to do with 50p footage in 50p timelines. So here I've got a clip which is just filmed on a Panasonic AVC HD camera and it's filmed at 50p. And here I am in EDIUS 9.3 and you'll notice as it's playing, it's catching up to 49 frames before it has to go to the next second. If I look at the same thing inside of EDIUS 8, and you'll notice here, if you go through it 1 frame at a time, this is a 50p clip, but the timecode acts like it's only got 25 frames. Small change, but basically that was an irritating one in that it wasn't counting the frames properly in a 50p project. Next useful option comes on exporting. So if I go off to print file, and obviously you've got all the same list of encoders and everything else that you're used to inside of EDIUS. Now we've always had the option to set a default exporter. Now you have the option to set up to 4 of them. So coming down here to the Save as Default button, if I click on it, obviously it just saves the default exporter. If I click on the little triangle, it gives me the option of saving it to one of these 4 separate slots. So obviously the first one's just been set because I did it. If, say, I also want to be able to do a Grass Valley HQ fine, and I can click on the little triangle there and choose that to be number 2. If I then want to do a kind of H.264 files, again I can click on that and save that as the default there as well. So now I've got 3 or 4 different options for the default exporter. And of course you don't have to use one of these presets as a default, you can make up some of your own. So I'm on an interlaced high definition timeline. Suppose I want to have the option to very quickly make a progressive file of a different size. I've just got to make up a preset. So I'm going to choose H.264, enable conversion, open that up, choose the size I want to go to, 1280x720, make sure it's progressive, and I'm going to save that as a preset. Go to that preset up here and set that as number 4 default. So now, obviously, I've got my own personal settings, but it's all saved as one of these. Now, to use one of those, obviously, you go up to File, Export, and Print to File. That'll get you to the regular menu, but if you go to the default export, you can see I've got one of these 4 settings that I've set as a default, which I can choose to export. Like that one, bosh, I am now making that kind of MPEG-4 file. I can also do the same thing from the export button, which is on the program window, and choose the default there. I can also put a little button onto the window which lets me choose the default exporter there. So let's go to the recorder, right, look through this lot, and there we are. These are my print to file default exporters. So I could add that one, that one, that one, and that one in. And now you can see I've even got buttons there. So I want to click that one and it's automatically going to make that kind of AVI file or that one or whatever. Final thing you can do on this default exporter, if I come back to the normal print to file dialog box, is down here, back on the default button. If I click on there, I can actually change the name of the export. If I want to change that and say what size it is or whatever, I can just rename it and say it's 1920 HQX25P, or maybe if I've set this one up and actually this is the one I'm going to use for YouTube, I could just call it YouTube. So now when I go to export using the default exporter, it's actually got the right name there, or here. So a very quick way of setting up some very simple defaults. It's very useful, especially if you're in a large organization and you just want to set up the same export defaults for everybody. You can very quickly make 2 or 3 of them, and then people don't have to think. They just have to come here, choose the exporter, bosh, it's done. And of course the other thing is that if you come into the keyboard shortcut settings, you can also set keyboard shortcuts for them. So you can see I've got the option there to add to the batch exporter in each of the different defaults, or just go straight print to file. So if I wanted to say choose that one, number 2 as my HQX file, I can just assign some kind of keyboard shortcut to it, maybe Control and F11. And now, my normal F11 gets away my print to dialog box, my Control F11 will straight to the exporting box so I can make my AVI file. So a nice thing just to speed up your workflow. Now there's a few other changes, most of them are to do with different file formats that EDIUS now supports that it didn't support before. So we can now decode 5.9 cinema RAW clips from the Canon cameras. There's now some XDCam HD export presets, that sort of thing. With the workgroup version, there's support now for exporting XAVC Intra 4K files. But the other major change to do with formats is to do with RED footage. Now I have to admit I don't use RED footage myself because I can't afford a RED camera, but if you are using RED, we've now got the option to use the graphics card here to accelerate the playback of RED footage, so you should get better playback of RED footage. To get to it, you go to the System Settings, Importer Exporter, RED, GPU, and you can see here it says Not Used, but I can click on that and I can actually select a graphics card to use to accelerate it. Now in this system, you notice I haven't got anything. I've got a pretty old graphics card in this. It's an NVIDIA 580 graphics card, 1.5 gig of RAM, and that's not good enough. Let's have a look at another system. This has got an NVIDIA 1060 in it, and you can see here that I've got the option to use the 1060 to help decode RED footage, which should mean better playback with RED footage. So some nice little changes there. The other extra that we've got is to do with closed captions. Now, closed captions are basically a way of doing subtitles. Not used in the UK, which is where I'm based, but they are used a lot in America. So with closed captions, it's a bit like teletext that we have in the UK. You can pull them up on TV. There'll be subtitles that you can turn on and turn off again. Now, the new stuff to do with closed captions with EDIUS doesn't let you make them, it just lets you display them. So first of all, you have to have a file that's actually got closed captions embedded in it. And this isn't every type of file. It's some QuickTime files and also some MXF files can have closed captions in it. You can't bring in a file and then add in closed captions yourself. It has to be in the file in the first place. Now when you bring them in, you can then display the closed captions on screen. Now to get to the display, you come up to View, On Screen Display, and you can see here it says Closed Captions. Obviously there's an on or an off. Now on my particular setup, this footage doesn't have closed captions on it, so you can't see it. Under this dialog box, there's also a settings heading. So if you go to that, you can see there, you can choose what type of closed captions there are. There's basically 2 standards, CEA 608 and CEA 708. Obviously you'll end up using the one that matches the captions that you are importing. And the whole point is then you can see the closed captions whilst you're editing. And then at the end of it, you'll be able to output those closed captions as part of the file. They'll still be embedded in the file when you take it out. So it basically passes it through. It doesn't let you make them. It doesn't let you bring them in separately and combine them. Literally, if they're in there in the first place, you can watch them and then you can output. Now, there might be more additions to do with closed captions and subtitles in the future. We don't know. Right now, what we've got is the ability to see closed captions if they're actually in the file in the first place. Of course, there's also been an update inside of Mink, which is basically supporting the new Canon format that EDIUS now supports, supporting display of closed captions, again, if they're in the file. Now, again, to turn it on, you've got to come to Settings and then go to Preview, tick Closed Captions, and then set the format of closed captions that you're looking at, and then you'll be able to see the closed captions inside of Mink. And then finally, Mink will let you see the timecode on 50p clips properly as well, as you can see here, all the way up to 50p and then on again. The only other new feature is that now EDIUS supports using the Arger IO 4K as a preview device. Personally, I tend to use Blackmagic most of the time. In fact, in this system, I've even got an old Matrox box, which is working happily with EDIUS 9. Well, it now supports an Arger 4K IO as well as a way of previewing video. Anyway, that's a quick wrap up of everything new in EDIUS 9.3. And it's free to anybody that owns EDIUS 9. You just download it from the Grass Valley site, or if you've got EDIUS Pro, it prompts you to install it next time it pops up. I'm often asked what's new in EDIUS 8 compared to EDIUS 9, so I'll just do a quick summary here of all the new things that have been added since EDIUS 8 came out in November of 2017. Obviously, the first thing is it does HDR, so you can do HDR editing and output HDR files. It does MPEG-4 files in 10-bit and 422 color space. You can export H.265 files as long as you've got the right kind of hardware. They've revamped the scopes, so now you've got better scopes for grading. Obviously, a support of a lot of new formats. We've got improved quality on the slow motion, display of closed captions, and coloured markers, which have all just been added. And quite a few little tweaks to the interface, like the ability to adjust which LUTs appear in this list and so on. So there's quite a few things that have been added to EDIUS 9. Obviously, more things will be added during its lifetime. So I hope you found that useful. If you want any more information, please contact me, david@dvctraining.co.uk. Visit the website, www.dvctraining.co.uk. And obviously don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel to see future videos. And I'll see you next time.